they're actually giving themselves like an artificial tan. That's essentially what a sunscreen is. So sunscreens contain pigments that absorb, they're translucent to your naked eye, but they absorb UVB radiation the same way that your melanin does. Now, the problem that we have is that people aren't producing much melanin because they're not getting much sun. Your body only produces melanin when you get sun. So when you get sun, you produce a tan, and the tan is your sunscreen. I say that again. Okay. When you get a tan, the tan is your sunscreen. So you can just think about those kinds of glasses, like prescription glasses that some people have, that when they go outside automatically darken, and become like sunglasses, and then when they go into low light situations, they go back to being clear. That's how your skin is. So when we go out into sun, our body produces melanin. That melanin is like sunglasses to protect ourselves from those deleterious effects of UV radiation like we were talking about. Like, for instance, the fact that UV light in excess without protection can damage collagen fibers. That's one of the reasons it causes sort of wrinkling over time for people and ages the skin. But when we have a tan, we're more protected from that. And when people use sunscreen, it's just basically because they don't have a sufficient tan. So they need something to protect their, sort of, I mean, this is going to sound rude, but I got to say it because I think it helps us, their sort of maggoty white skin. That's sort of how we end up. Like, if you've ever, sometimes, in the survival skills world, we'll look for grubs and we'll break open old rotting trees. And what you find inside are these large grubs, these maggoty colored grubs, because they don't see any sunlight, so their skin is like this pasty, chalky white. Well, that's sort of how a lot of people's bodies are, right? Yeah. And maybe you guys see less of that where you live, but come up to New England for a little bit and get the clothes off of some of these farm boys, and what you'll see is like, wow, very pasty skin. So when they're like that, they don't have any protection from the sun. Now, there are also people who are very fair-skinned because of where they hail from. So an example would be somebody from the northern European climates where there's consistently cloudy days and low levels of UV. Those people don't produce much melanin. This is an epigenetic, this is sort of an adaptation to low levels of sun. Right. So they don't produce much melanin, and the idea is anytime the sun broke through the clouds where they lived, they could produce some vitamin D, right? They don't want to block too much of that. Exactly. So they would have very pale skin. But people who come from Africa, of course, they were getting so much sun all the time, sunny days every day, hot, sunny, hot, sunny. They needed really dark skin to protect themselves from getting too much UV. So I think that concept makes sense to everybody.
Yeah, so it's almost like you're saying their skin is a form of sunglasses kind of a thing.
Exactly. Now, here's the thing. We're now global. And that means that there are people who live near the equator with pale skin, and there are people with very dark skin who live in the northern climates. Right. This creates some serious issues that I think are not being sufficiently addressed. And I think one of the reasons they're not being addressed is because people tiptoe around the issue of race. Yeah. And everybody's so concerned about being PC. Nobody wants to talk about this. But what happens when somebody, great example for me, incidentally, I haven't used sunscreen in probably ever. And I was a ocean lifeguard for a lot of years. Mm-hmm. And I developed a very, very serious base tan because I would be on a lifeguard stand for 8 hours a day, every day, all summer. Right. And I lifeguarded with some girls who were incredibly fairly complected, with red hair and lots of freckles and no ability, apparently, to produce melanin. I mean, so little that it wouldn't be noticeable. They just didn't tan. Wow. And every day they would burn. Yeah. And every day they'd come back at the end of the day and you'd go like, wow, they're burned. And then a couple of weeks in, their noses were peeling. And a couple of weeks past that, they're getting like scar tissue. Because no matter what they did, they could not, even with sunblock, even with hats, these girls would burn. Their skin was designed to live in a place where there was almost no sun ever. That makes sense? Yeah. If those people moved down to Africa, it's highly likely that they would develop skin cancer over time. And actually, we see a huge issue with this because the English exported a lot of people to Australia. And the climate and the UV radiation in Australia is very different than it is in England. And we see that white people in Australia develop a lot of skin cancers. Conversely, I live in Maine, and we have a significant population of people from Somalia who've come here.
Interesting.
Now, these are very dark-skinned people. And the major issue here is that no matter how much sun they get, they're not getting enough. Unless they spend noontime every day in the sun naked, they're just not getting enough UV, because to penetrate the dark sunglass of their skin,
right,
they need lots and lots of sun exposure, which means that they put themselves at risk for chronic vitamin D deficiencies. So I recommend a book right now called The UV Advantage. And that book is by the doctor who really discovered vitamin D3 in its active form. And he gives us a table in there where we can sort of judge our skin complexion and then how much sun exposure we need. Average, sort of white-skinned person is going to need about 15 minutes a day, noontime sun on as much skin as they can expose to have sufficient vitamin D levels. But as the person gets darker and darker, that could be as much as 3 times what they need. Or they may need, as much as 3 times that. So, I'm a sort of olive complected person. I definitely need more sunlight than my partner who's, she's more lightly complected. She can get a little bit, she needs a little bit more. And then obviously a real dark skinned person needs a lot more than I would need.
So she would need less than you because she's less.
Correct.
Is that right?
And so imagine then we got people on either extreme. So we get the, almost albino, non-pigmented person. Mm-hmm. We get the Mediterranean or sort of Middle Eastern complected person. And then we get the darkest melanin pigment we can find in somebody from African descent, right? Mm-hmm. Very dark person. And we put all 3 of them out in the sun. At noon, when the UV is at its peak, that's really when we want to try to get sun. And we put them out on a summer day, and all 3 are naked. Mm-hmm. We could say after 10 to 15 minutes, our very pale person's they're fully charged up. Maybe a half an hour in, our Middle Eastern person's charged up. Maybe an hour or 2 in, our African person's charged up completely at max capacity, right? So, those are very rough numbers, and I think each person needs to really gauge this for themselves, but I want to give people a general idea.
And what was the name of that book really quickly?
The UV Advantage.
The book is called The UV Advantage.
Okay, good.
And it's a fantastic book that dispels, it's sort of the reference on the topic. So the next piece I want to say is this. When that UV light strikes our skin, we begin to form a sort of proto-form of vitamin D. It's not the active form yet, but it begins to form. Okay. This is a really important piece. You guys may be familiar with this research. If you're not, or if the listeners aren't, this is an important piece to remember. So, listen up here, guys. When UV strikes your skin, you create some proto-form of vitamin D, but it takes up to 48 hours to absorb that from the skin. It's in the sebum of your skin. It's in the oil of your skin. Okay. And if you go from being out in the sun and you jump in the hot shower and you soap up, you wash that off.
Okay.
And you won't actually absorb it. Wow. And so you'll produce much less vitamin D than if you allow that to really soak in. Now, I'm not a believer in much soap at all on the body. I think that there's great other ways to clean the body. So I think stripping the oils off the skin is something we want to avoid. Okay. But for the average person out there, right, they get zestfully clean when they go in the bathtub and shower. They lather themselves down like we see in those soap commercials, and they literally wash that vitamin D off their body, and it does not get absorbed in. And the thing about ultraviolet light, especially for people who live in the northern latitudes, every day of sunlight is like a deposit in your bank account. The bank account in this case is your liver. The bank is your liver. Uh-huh. And what you're putting in the account is vitamin D. Now, we can store vitamin D because it's fat soluble. It can stay in the body for a while. And our goal is to deposit enough vitamin D into our liver so that we can make it through the winter to when the sun is strong enough for us to make UV again. Because basically from the beginning of autumn till the beginning of spring, there's not enough UV in the northern latitudes for us to make vitamin D. So we have to store it up so that we have enough to get through the winter without getting deficient.
So it'll actually store for a matter of months then?
It will, because it's a fat-soluble vitamin. So when it comes to our water-soluble vitamins, an example would be vitamin C, we can't really store it because we pee it out. But when it's oil-soluble, in the same way that we end up storing certain toxins for a long time because they're stored in our body fat, well, there's nutrients like that. Vitamin A is an example. Vitamin D is an example. They store in our fat, and primarily vitamin D stores in our liver. Now, some people might be wondering then, wait a second, if in the northern climates it's hard to make enough vitamin D and you can only make it for a short time, how have people survived up there? And an example would be the Inuit. How did they live so far north? Obviously, they can't lay out naked a lot in the sun, and even if they could, the sun's at such an angle where it's difficult most of the year to make vitamin D. How did they do it? Well, they would survive up there by getting their vitamin D from dietary sources, primarily from fatty fish and from eating liver. Liver and fatty fish are the best dietary sources for vitamin D. There's some in eggs. There's some in certain mushrooms, but not sufficient. Primarily, if we're going to try to survive off dietary vitamin D, we're going to need to eat liver. We're going to need to eat fatty fish. And that's where we hear this idea of cod liver oil. It's very rich in vitamin D. But liver is incredibly rich in vitamin D. In fact, up in the Arctic, there are animals like the polar bear and seal whose livers are so rich in vitamin D, you can actually overdose on vitamin D from eating it. So that is how people survived up there. So for those of us who aren't living on an incredibly liver-rich diet and are depending on the sun for our vitamin D, we need to think about going outside in the noonday sun with some skin exposure as being as important as getting, the nutrients we need from food. It's literally a nutrient.
Interesting. Wow, this is fascinating. We got to take a short break here. I got one little question before the break, and what do you think about the issues many people are bringing up these days with liver, eating organs, and the fact that this Fukushima thing and all these chemicals are being stored in these types of organs in fish and salmon and these types of things with the Fukushima and things? So my position is a little bit wishy-washy here. I've got to admit, I'm going to try to take the most balanced approach here. Okay. There are, unfortunately, an incident like Fukushima pollutes the highest quality foods on the planet. So the thing about foods from the ocean, as an example, these are primarily wild foods. They're the last wild foods that are really in people's diets. Right. And unfortunately, now we're dealing, those are our wild fishes and our seaweeds. Unfortunately, those are being polluted with radionucleotides. What do? I don't know. What about, yes, livers become a storage place not just for vitamin D, but for lots of fat-soluble toxins. However, it's probably the most nutrient-dense food on the planet would be liver. So how are we going to deal with this? I don't think it's as simple as, we're just going to stop eating it, but we are going to have to get a lot more thoughtful about clean sources. Yeah. We were talking with Dr. Lawrence Wilson, I think, a while back, and he was saying the same thing, that liver and a lot of these organ meats are some of the most powerful foods on the planet, but he no longer recommends them because of this whole toxicity issue. So that's why I brought that up. But we'll be right back with Daniel Vitalis. I want to ask him after the break about, I thought it was really interesting what you were saying about the washing of yourself, and maybe washing your armpits instead, and just places like that instead of lathering all over, and
let's talk about that.
Cholesterol and things like that. So we'll be right back with Daniel Vitalis. Make sure to visit his website, danielvitalis.com, as well as sirthrival.com, where he's got tons and tons of great, amazing products. So check that out, and we'll be right back after this break. Rebounding is, in my mind, one of the best ways to detoxify your lymphatic system, and it's the only exercise on earth that will actually detoxify your lymphatic system. And your lymph system is responsible for storing toxins and chemicals and poisons that you're exposed to, and there's no pump for the lymph system. It doesn't have a heart, so you have to move it up and down, and it's filled with millions of one-way valves that get squeezed and pushed and opened and closed every time you jump. And we feel like we've found the best rebounder on the market today. It's the Rolls Royce of rebounding. It's called the Bellicon. And I highly, highly stand behind this product. It's absolutely amazing. If you want to hear what some of our guests said about it, check them out on our store. You can listen to what a lot of our guests have said about rebounding and the Bellicon in particular. So a lot of times people will go on the rebounder with oxygen for cancer if they're really sick. And it's one of the most powerful things you can do to cleanse your body and to exercise every single cell in your body, every organ in your body. It's the only internal organ exercise you could do. And it's absolutely incredible. It also helps to rebuild bone density because of the up and down motion, the G-force that gets applied to every cell of your body. And it tightens and tones your body, and it's just really, really great aerobic exercise. And the Bellicon is made with straps, these bungee cords instead of springs. So it's silent, and they have a warranty on it. It's the best rebounder on the market today. So if you're in the market for one, I would highly recommend just saving up and getting the Bellicon, because there's no other rebounder on the market that's better than this thing. I firmly believe that. So if you're interested in it, check it out, extremehealthradio.com/Bellicon. That's B as in boy, ELLICON. And you can learn more about it and watch the videos on that page too. So thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy your rebounder, and we'll catch you on the next episode.
All free shows, all the time, on Extreme Health Radio. Opening minds and transforming lives worldwide. Join our community today. Sign up to our email list and instantly get our free gift to you, along with loads of inspirational content and cutting-edge tips to help change your life at extremehealthradio.com/subscribe.
And we've got Club Kate going on over there. Kate,
like that little dancing?
Kate's dancing here in the studio.
There was no gong, though.
There was no gong, that's right. We've shut the gong down for the day.
Yes.
So I just want to let you guys know also, don't forget to check out that rebounder. Really, really great machine. And we love using ours, so hopefully you enjoy it. And you can check that out in our store as well if you like. And as the lady said, feel free to sign up to our newsletter list. We've got lots of great stuff coming out of there, and a great ebook that we can send you immediately that you can get for free. Actually, no, you can get it on Amazon for $15, but we'll send it to you for free. So
that's right.
Don't forget to check that out. And I wanted to ask Daniel after the break here. I don't want to get too far off topic here, but I wanted to ask you about this. What do you think are the a couple things? One is about perhaps like just washing maybe your genitals, your armpits, and things like that instead of doing a full body wash like you were talking about. And then also I wanted to ask you about getting sun, like laying out in the sun naked. Is there an advantage to getting sun on those parts of your body that we typically don't do?
I love these questions. I love you guys. You're great. Okay. Let's start with the second question, the latter question there.
Okay.
Most of the most of the diseases that excessive UV radiation can cause are benign, except malignant melanoma, which is the deadly form of skin cancer. Now, what's fascinating about that skin cancer is that typically people develop the melanoma on parts of their body that get the least sun exposure.
Right. I've noticed that.
So they don't get it on the forearm where they're getting the sunlight all the time. They get it like on their, pasty white thigh. Why is that? I think it is crucial that we get sun on as much of our bodies as we can. Now, for me, in being a rewilder and somebody who has, I remember the first sort of nudist place I went, all the kind of fear around that and the discomfort around that, and really facing down it's essentially, if you picture it, it's like when you turn, 4 years old, you're handed a set of clothes and you're never allowed to take it off again, right? I mean, that's kind of what goes on. It's like,
right.
You're handed some clothes and it's like, you can't be naked around anybody ever again unless you're trying to make a baby.
Right.
So, and for women, I mean, it's like, here's a bra, you never take it off, right? Mm-hmm. So what we see is that these cancers are forming in places that aren't getting much sun exposure. So I think it's really crucial, and I think it's good for people to confront that. It's fantastic if you can get to places where you can be naked. One practice that I love is just going hiking and finding spots where sometimes quite close to where there's people, but where no one can see you and no one's coming, and you can just strip down and lay out. I think it's great. And ultimately, I like living in a place where I can step outside naked whenever I want, and I make sure that everywhere I live is like that. So
yeah, I think that's
I think it is
important
crucial.
too. Yeah, I think that's really important. Getting that sun on your skin in places like that. I don't know. I just think that that's more natural. I mean, that's more the way we should be living.
Yeah, and men should know that when you get sun exposure, you produce more testosterone. And this has been known since the 60s. Certain spots on the body cause you to produce more testosterone than others. Your back is an example of a place when you get sun on your back, you produce more testosterone than sun just falling on your face. But men, sun exposure to your testicles causes you to produce a lot of testosterone.
Really?
That's very valuable knowledge. So yeah, and get those balls in the sun. It's important. Women, get your breasts in the sun. It's important. So moving on from that conversation to just say about skin cleaning. The way I really see soap as being reserved for places that, get a little bit funkier than other places. For me, that's really like my ear canal, my armpits, my groin, and my butt. Everywhere else, I don't really, feel like I need to wash the oils out of my skin. But I remember, and I think a lot of people's experience will validate this. I remember when I was growing up in my, very toxic lifestyle that I was enmeshed in, like so many other people, that when I would get even a little sweat on my skin, I'd feel really dirty. And I'd feel like I wanted to wash. And looking back, what I see is a couple things were going on. One is that my skin was a route for the elimination of fat-soluble toxins. So I would feel those on my skin. I would feel the sort of need to clean my skin after I'd sweat because my body would be eliminating toxins. The second thing is that I was eating a primarily omega-6 fat diet, and mostly I was eating hydrogenated fats and trans fats. And so those would be coming out of my skin. And when that was on my skin, I would feel dirty. Now, because I'm on a clean lifestyle and I've been on that for a long time, and I eat really clean foods and I eat good quality fats, my oils that secrete from my skin don't feel dirty to me. In fact, they feel clean. I feel really clean after I sweat now. So I think that that's something that happens as you cleanse more, and you guys may be able to validate that.
Yeah, it's definitely something that's changed in our lives, and that makes a lot of sense. Just washing those parts of your body that kind of really, I guess, would be more prone to sweat or things like that.
Right.
But
I've noticed the cleaner we've got. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, it's that those areas produce more oils and certain types of oils that bacteria live on, and those bacteria produce those smells that we encounter. So that's actually the byproduct of bacteria who are eating our oils. So we can wash those areas, but we don't want to. We want to realize like stripping oils out of our skin creates a couple problems. It creates the problem we talked about a moment ago, which is that we don't have, we wash away the vitamin D that we're producing. Another issue is that we create areas of low acidity and higher alkalinity. And now here, this is an important piece. Fats are made of fatty acids, and that tells us those are acidic. Fats are acidic, right? Does that make sense? A fatty acid.
Right.
Now, the fat layer on our skin, that oil layer, is called the acid mantle. That acid mantle creates an environment for the organisms that live on our skin to enmesh themselves. They need that acidic environment. And what happens with soap is very alkaline. Soap is made with lye. It's alkaline. When we wash an area of our skin, we break away, we strip away the acid force field, if you will, and we create an opening in that. That opening allows organisms that prefer an alkaline environment to invade that area, and those tend to be more pathogenic. So you could think of the acid layer of our skin as being the environment or the soil for the acid-loving bacteria like Lactobacillus acidophilus, which means acid lover, to live, and they function like a force field. They're literally our primary line, first line defense. They're the soldiers surrounding the castle. They live in acid, and when we wash that away with soap, we wash them away with it. We create an environment they can't live in. And those are our symbionts. We want them living there. They protect us so that when other organisms that are dangerous to us, like staph, land on our skin, the good organisms that live in our acid layer can eat those, gobble them up, create an environment where they can't live. We don't want to wash that away too much. So instead, what we could focus on is things like dry brushing our skin, wet brushing our skin. Of course, you can buy a beautiful, natural bristled brush and keep one in the shower. You could keep one in your sauna. You could keep one sort of, wherever you do your exercise in the morning, whatever, where you can brush your skin. That'll remove a lot of the dead skin and allow you to sort of feel exfoliated, but not strip away your acid layer. And of course, I just think sauna is really one of the greatest ways to clean the skin as well.
That's interesting. Yeah, I want to get to the sauna in just 1 second, but I was actually listening to something, I forget what it was recently, where they were talking about how sun exposure is actually really, really beneficial for helping to split, I guess, these the cholesterol and make, to naturally lower cholesterol. And many people think that the sun is so bad and for all these reasons, but it's one of the main ways that our body, I forget the science of what they were saying, but it actually lowers cholesterol and balances it in a more healthy way. Have you heard that?
Right. And, it lowers our blood pressure as well. And, it's also basically what is the story here? The story is that if we don't get enough sun exposure, our body systems start to break down. And I want to also impart this is that vitamin D, once it's its active form, so the vitamin D gets formed on the skin, it gets absorbed into the bloodstream. It circulates to the liver where it's changed slightly, and then it circulates to the kidneys again where it's changed slightly. Now in its active form, vitamin D is actually a steroidal hormone, not a vitamin. Active vitamin D is a steroid hormone, and all our steroid hormones are based on cholesterol. These steroidal hormones, they're fat soluble, which is one of the reasons it can accumulate in our body. But it is literally a steroid. You can imagine what happens, how we start to become flaccid and weak. Our blood pressure goes up, our cholesterol goes up, we get more depressed, we don't sleep as well, and we start to get cancer when we don't get enough vitamin D. The other things, and here's the ones that everybody knows. If a kid doesn't get enough vitamin D, they develop rickets because vitamin D accumulates in our intestines where it helps us to absorb calcium and phosphorus, which is what our bones are made of. If we don't get enough vitamin D, our bones can't form completely. And so kids would end up with bow legs and, bones that were poorly formed. And this was called rickets. And this is important to hear. If they weren't adding vitamin D by law to milk, we would have rickets everywhere around the country. The only reason we're not seeing bow-legged rickets children is because we add pharmaceutical vitamin D to milk. And so many people drink milk, it protects them from rickets. But we do that. We add vitamin D because we had a rickets problem in this country. We fortify iodine because we had a thyroid issues in this country.
That's right.
We fortify vitamin B3 because we had pellagra issues in this country. I mean, people are so vitamin deficient that the government has to add vitamins to their deficient food in order for them not to have outward signs of these diseases.
Wow.
Now, the rickets happens in children. In adults, what happens is something called osteomalacia, and this is a deep aching in the bones. And this kind of thing gets called fibromyalgia, gets called chronic fatigue syndrome. It gets labeled all these other things when often it's a vitamin D deficiency.
What about scoliosis too, maybe?
Scoliosis is often happens at childhood, so I won't, at birth, and I don't want to necessarily associate that, but we can say osteoporosis for sure.
Wow.
So, oh man, grandma's bones have holes in them. Why? Well, she's not absorbing the calcium and phosphorus from her diet and incorporating those into her bones because she's not getting enough vitamin D.
Wow.
And then additionally, vitamin D is used by the immune system. Vitamin D destroys cancers. So again, without sufficient vitamin D, we are susceptible to prostate cancer, breast cancer, lung cancer, colon cancer, colorectal cancer. Another piece that I want to add in here is that, and we've touched on it, our circadian rhythm is regulated by our vitamin by our sun exposure. So our serotonin and melatonin. And keep in mind that melatonin starts being produced when we're in darkness. And it stops being produced when we have optic light intake, optic sunlight intake. So in other words, once you open your eyes and the light travels down that optic nerve, that's when you stop producing it. This is one of the reasons it's important if you get up in the night, say you get up to pee or to check on something, that you don't turn lights on if you can help it. because it will affect your ability to sleep. It throws off your circadian rhythm. So we want bright light in the day, and we want no light at night if we can get it. The last piece I want to throw in here, and this brings us back to the early conversation where you guys were joking about your moods if you don't get enough sunlight. We produce endorphins when we get sunlight. These are opiates. So we get high by being in the sun. And I don't think I need to explain that to anybody. Everybody can feel that. You get high when you're in the sun. You produce opiates.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's crazy. So now when people get up in the middle of the night and they turn on the light, is that really bad, or is it?
Well, what happens is that you stop producing melatonin, and then it takes a lot longer to get back to sleep. So if you're getting up in the night, if you can develop the discipline of keeping the lights off, when you get back to bed, you'll fall asleep much more quickly.
Interesting.
And so you'll sleep better. So that's a practice that I've been into for a long time, is just trying to avoid it. And often, especially traveling and such, you'll see, or just living with somebody, people don't always do that. So I'm in the habit too of, if I think somebody's going to turn a light on, or if I have to walk by somebody else who's got a light on, I really shield myself from that light so that I can, maintain my sleep cycle.
Yeah.
Are you talking like if people get up and go to the bathroom and they have a tiny little like dim night light, is that still going to disrupt you, or is that?
The brighter the light, the more it will disrupt you.
Gotcha, right.
The brighter the light. So you can imagine the ambient light from a nightlight's different than looking at that nightlight.
Right.
And that's different than turning on a light, and that's different than looking into that light bulb.
Right.
So the more light that we get, keep in mind that the light outside, like in sunlight, is thousands of times brighter than the light in our homes.
Right.
So, it's not like the lights in our homes are particularly bright. They're not. One other piece I wanted to add for you guys too is just this, that vitamin D is required in the regulation of up to 1,000 of our genes. So, we have 20,000 genes.
Wow.
In the human genome, and 1,000 of those, are regulated by vitamin D. So our gene expression, our whole epigenome, who we are, what we are, is incredibly influenced by the amount of sunlight we get. So I don't know if you know this term troglodyte, but it refers to a cave dweller.
Wow.
And I often joke that people are like troglodytes, like they're like cave dwellers hiding from the sunlight. And I love just this biblical reference that when the deeds of men are wicked, they want to hide in the shadows. Right? It's like when we hide from the light because we're not feeling good about ourselves, right? We want to hide in the darkness.
Right.
And there's this idea of we've turned away from the light of the sun, right? Or the light of God almost. There's this concept that permeates the spiritual teachings of the world, where all things good are related to light.
Wow.
And all things sort of bad are related to darkness. And I think ultimately as a species we need to ask ourselves why have we turned away from the light, and why are we so obsessed with artificial light? We spend our time in the light of the television, in the light of the iPhone, in the artificial lights of our homes, and we're spending less and less time in natural sunlight. Now, you don't really have to convince anybody that it feels better to be in natural sunlight. It's just that that's not what we're doing. I think we need to really explore that more.
Right.
We need to get a little bit more sunlight.
Right. And it was interesting, a while back, I was talking with the guy that did the intro to the show, Sean Stevenson, and he was explaining to me about how even being exposed to artificial light inside your house affects your vitamin D and ability to sleep. And even when that artificial light just touches your skin, you don't even have to look into it with your eyes. And I thought that was really interesting too.
We will soon understand the real ramifications of the photoreception capabilities of the skin. So, we're so early in our research. We're so early in understanding. Of course, if you had asked the shaman of your tribe 10,000 years ago, if, your body could sense light just on the skin, it would be a no-brainer. Of course it can. But now we have to go through this process of proving it to ourselves scientifically so we can validate that. But we are learning that. And obviously everything we've talked about today really does, it shows us your skin is we literally photosynthesize vitamin D. Plants photosynthesize sugars. We eat sugars and we photosynthesize vitamin D. But we are photosynthetic, just like plants. And so just like plants, we require sunlight to be vigorous and to thrive.
That's interesting. So let's talk a couple minutes, just wrapping up here. One of the things that you mentioned on one of our past shows is that flux program, justgetflux.com, I think is the website. And we use that. And we've been using a lot of candles lately. And we use that sauna that you talked about. And, what are some good things that people can do, getting out in the sun for a couple minutes, like you said? And,
well, getting bright light early in the day is really important.
Okay.
So, the earlier, first thing in the morning, if you could walk out into full blown bright sunlight naked, studies show you would sleep better that night.
Wow.
Because it sets the circadian rhythm.
Okay.
In the same way, once it's nighttime, we want to start really minimizing the amount of light we're getting. So we can start to dim the lights down. We can switch to things like candles, which are wonderful. And for our machines, we can use programs